Welcome back to Sanish. I'm Joe Carducci, and the world is officially off its axis. Days ago, President No New Wars Trump ordered military strikes on 3 of Iran's most fortified nuclear sites, claiming the Fordow facility is eliminated and the Pentagon is calling it an overwhelming success. Though, as usual, we're still waiting for the receipts. Iran's government is calling the U.S. attack a barbaric act and a violation of international law, while Israel's Netanyahu is out here praising Trump's courageous decision and promising more strikes if Iran retaliates. Are you fucking kidding me? Here at home, Trump is touting historic success and threatening precision, speed, and expertise if Iran doesn't back down. Democrats are calling the strikes unconstitutional and a reckless escalation, with Senator Chris Murphy and others pointing out that Iran posed no imminent threat to the U.S. and Congress was never consulted. The UN is calling for restraint, AOC is calling for impeachment, and the world is holding its collective breath. So what does this all mean for American democracy, the rule of law, and the future of global stability? And how do we keep our sanity when the news cycle is this relentless? Today, I'm joined by 2 guests who know how to cut through all the bullshit and get to the truth. George Conway and Heather Cox Richardson. George Conway is an attorney, a political commentator, host of the podcast George Conway Explains It All, and one of the most incisive critics of Trump's presidency and legal maneuvering. You know him from his work with the Lincoln Project, his relentless advocacy for the rule of law, and his ability to call out authoritarianism in real time. We're also joined by Heather Cox Richardson, historian, author, and the voice behind the wildly popular Letters from an American newsletter. Heather has a rare gift for connecting the dots between today's headlines and the long arc of American history, reminding us that democracy is always a work in progress and that the current moment is terrifying, but also has deep roots and real lessons. This is the first time I've got to talk to her on a podcast. I was very excited to do that. We met in person, but this was my very first time interviewing her. Holy shit. Together, we'll talk about the legality of Trump's strikes, the risks of unchecked executive power, and what Americans should be watching for as Congress and the courts respond. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Sanish, where I am freaking out and trying not to fangirl because 2 people I have so much respect for, one of which happens to be my very good friend, are with me at the same time. And the backstory that maybe you don't know that I didn't know until very recently is that they go way, way back to when they were wee, young lads and lasses. And,
how old were you then?
In 1980. How old was I in 1980? I was 6 in 1980. Yeah. But I was a very sassy 6-year-old, and I didn't know when I was 6 that I would grow up to be able to talk to 2 people who are geniuses like you and advocates for democracy like you. But George, welcome first of all, George Conway and Heather Cox Richardson.
It's just a coincidence that you and I were talking about doing this with Heather last week, and then I went up to see my parents in Massachusetts on Saturday, and I found this box that they had. And it is my freshman year rooming assignment
at
Harvard that's assigned me to Strauss A42, which is right on the square, and told me that my roommate was Mr. Nicholas Stephen Stathakis of Athens, Greece. And the reason why that's relevant here is that 2 floors beneath us in September of 1980, in Strauss A21, I think it was.
A1.
Was one Heather Cox Richardson of Damariscotta, Maine, or where in Maine?
Mid-coast, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to know how you guys think your alma mater is meeting this moment. That's something that I'm curious about. How are they responding to the not obeying in advance that Timothy Snyder writes about?
I think it's really important they stood up when they did, because we were desperate to have a big institution to stand up. And I have to say, George has been great out there about pushing the law firms to do the same thing. There is, I think, a really interesting discussion to be had on what the role of universities and law firms and so on is in protecting democracy. And that is interesting when you think of a place like the university, and certainly Harvard, because people point to the idea of protecting research, for example, or protecting the accessibility of people from other countries or whatever. But what is the role of a university in a democratic society? I think is pretty much on the table. What do you think, George?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I absolutely agree with the analogy to the law firms, because I think what happened with the law firms is that a major law firm caved. It was a horrible error in judgment. It was really against the law firm's own interest, the profession's own interest, and the country's own interest. And then that caused a cascade of cowardice. And Harvard standing up kind of stopped that process in the academic field. And I think everybody should be grateful to Harvard for basically standing up when it did. And in terms of the question of what's the role of the academy in standing up for the rule of law, I think it bears an important role, because the whole concept of a university, at least in the Western tradition, is to promote freedom of thought. It's to stand on freedom of thought and to basically educate the society, or at least elements of the society, about the importance of keeping an open mind and using reason and facts and methods employed in the humanities and in the social sciences and in the natural sciences to come to rational answers, and to be open-minded about the answers to those questions. And that's exactly why authoritarians seek to destroy or subjugate academic institutions. And that's exactly why Trump and his ilk are attacking Harvard.
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I don't know if this resonated with you, but when William F. Buckley Jr. wrote God and Man at Yale in 51, do you remember that piece of the book where he talks about how professors won't give him the answers to exams? And this is proof that they are trying to hide something from him. And all I could think of when I read that was, do you remember at the basement of Lamont Library, there were those red books of bound exams? I don't even remember what they were called. And I'm like, the idea that somehow this was a plot that said that the professors were trying to keep their, communist tendencies from him because they were trying not to make sure that he had the answers to the exams ahead of time. I just was like blown away by that. But the
Uh,
thing that hits me in this moment, and you've been in big law firms, why don't people understand that you cannot win by caving to this guy? I mean, this is sort of at least female socialization 101. You cannot appease these people. You must stop them. And even now, I'm watching the reactions to Iran and people seeming to think that if they let Trump do just this, he won't do the next thing. And it's like, you don't understand. He's trying desperately to get someone to stop him. Why do you think the law firms caved?
well, I do. I think the law firms caved for a very specific reason. I think most law firms, obviously would not have and did not. But these particular law firms caved because of the economics of their practices. These law firms, and I know this because I practiced at a law firm that did mergers and acquisitions work, they make incredible fees on mergers and acquisitions. And all of these mergers and acquisitions in the modern era they're not conglomerate mergers and acquisitions. They are usually companies either in the same industry or in overlapping industries. And as a result, they have antitrust and regulatory issues that require government approvals. And these law firms are paid the way investment bankers are paid for these transactions. It's essentially contingency work. You get a percentage of the deal transaction if the transaction, and only if the transaction goes through. They get a percentage less than the investment bankers, but the investment bankers play a big role in hiring the law firms. So there's this double incentive that you will not to hire somebody or not to use a firm that's going to have trouble. And that's part of the package you get when you hire a law firm to do a deal, is you get whatever regulatory practice they have that is relevant to work on your transaction. Or something, you could also go to a specialist firm, but you get their antitrust lawyers or you get their FCC lawyers. And if you have there's CFIUS lawyers, and if you have a law firm that has trouble with the administration, that law firm could have trouble getting these deals, getting these matters that bring them so much money. And so that's why Paul Weiss caved. I mean, they brought on a very well-paid person from Cravath to head up their private equity and deal work. And, these partners at these firms are very, very powerful because of the money they bring in. And all of the other law firms that caved have practices that, to some extent, depend on these deals, and firms that basically need more of the deals to be basically to meet their expectations of making several $1 million a year per partner. And so that's why they caved. And remember, and the decision makers, people making these decisions, were corporate lawyers who don't understand politics. They really don't understand politics. They're actually, a lot of them are very, very ignorant when it comes to public affairs and public matters and politics. They really are. And so they caved. And they don't care. These people don't care about the profession. They don't care about the rule of law. They care about the bottom line. And that's what happened with these law firms.
I have a larger question for both of you about Donald Trump in particular, getting people to cave. I mean, you know him, George. Heather, I've never had the distinction of meeting him, but from a historical perspective, observing what he's been able to do, how I look at him and I see an incurious, unremarkable, incompetent buffoon, and yet he has had this ability, this uncanny historic ability to get people who know better, people who are smarter, people who should be able to outwit him, to bend the knee, to comply, to roll over, to placate him. And George, knowing him, but also Heather from a historical perspective of where we may have seen this throughout time before. But it's Donald fucking Trump? How are we here?
So I have sort of historical thoughts about that, but I'm going to test a theory first on George. George, it is my expectation that he is utterly charming in person. Is that correct?
Yeah, he absolutely can be. He sucks up to you. He's a great suck up, actually, which I think would surprise a lot of people. I'll tell you a story. The first time I ever spoke with Donald Trump was in 2006, when I was part of a group of condo unit owners at his Trump World Tower condo right across from the UN that waged a proxy battle against the incumbent board with the support of the Trump organization, because the incumbent board basically wanted to remove Trump's organization, the Trump organization, as the managing agent, and take his name off the building and so on and so forth, which would have eliminated some of the value of our property. Long story short, we won. We threw out members of the existing board. And then a couple of days later, I get this call. My secretary comes in, looks at me like she just doesn't believe it. She says, "Donald Trump is on the line." It's like, okay, yeah, sure. I wasn't surprised. I talked to Trump, and basically he spent like 2 or 3 minutes just flattering. "Oh, you've got such a marvelous speaking voice. You're such a good lawyer. What kind of law do you practice?" And da 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 da. And for my part, I sucked up back to him. I said, "Well, we would have lost a lot of money if we hadn't won that proxy fight." And he goes, "Absolutely, And then he wrote me a letter saying, "We got rid of some very bad people!" Exclamation point. And he can be very, very charming.
Then there's the next piece of it, and that's why people are unwilling to abandon him. And that I find really interesting in this moment, because it strikes me that rather like any kind of a criminal enterprise, but also like the techniques that were developed in the former Soviet republics, often with the help, by the way, of American political operatives, you get people involved in a criminal scheme in little ways at first. I can you just help me? I need to deliver this package. Something that is not a big leap for just a normal friendship. And then the next time it's harder to say no and harder to say no. And that works both physically for acts of criminality, but I think it also works psychologically. Well, I'm in this far. And
Absolutely.
and then you don't want to say no the next time. And before you know it, somebody has both psychological and real compromising material on you. And I think we see that in a lot of places of people who are either trying to look invisible, are participating, or are hoping that that they get tossed overboard because they know they're in too deep. And I look at that gang in the White House right now, and I think at this point they need him. They need him because they have broken so many laws. If they end up, as I say, being underbussed, they're going to jail.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I think of, I agree with exactly everything you said. And the way I've thought about it was, I remember, he's not my favorite person, but I remember Jim Comey
I was just going to say that.
talking about how Donald Trump and people like him eat your soul bit by bit. That's what he does. And the mob analogy is perfect. I mean, think of The Sopranos. What did Tony do to bind people to him? He'd send them go out. He'd send them to go out and kill somebody. He sent Christopher
First, you
out,
send them for pizza. You
right?
don't start with the killing because a lot of people would say no. You start with something like, "Can you get us a pizza?"
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
you,
No, yeah, they're already in, but to really finally prove themselves, you're absolutely right. They do things, but to really get to the point where he trusts you, you got to kill somebody.
Mm.
And so you work your way up to that, and then you become a made guy. And it's like Christopher hitting, taking out the cop that Tony supposedly killed his father. And that's absolutely right. And what happens with these Trumpers is there are two ways in which they're corrupted. One is the lies. Okay, they lie for him, and it becomes harder and harder to tell the truth after you've told a series of lies because then you have to admit all the lies that you told. And that's even true of people watching at home. Okay, they don't want to admit that they bought into a bunch of lies and they parroted a bunch of lies. If you come and you try to come to them and try to push them into admitting that or acknowledging that, they say, well, everybody lies. I can't believe the mainstream media. They separate themselves from reality, and in doing so, they can't look themselves in the mirror in the morning.
Mm.
Because if they actually take, expose themselves to facts and evidence that shows that they have been lying to themselves and lying to others and been lied to, they have it becomes too much of a psychological admission, too much for them. So they basically hide and cocoon themselves in this world of alternative facts. Where did that phrase come from? Um, so, they do that. And then, in the reaches of the political consultants and the lobbyists and the politicians, they become economically corrupted, right? Because you can't do business on the Republican side as a lobbyist, as a political consultant, unless you play with the family. And if you don't, then what's your fear? It's like you can't go to the Democrats because they hate you because you've been evil, okay, or anybody else. And at least went out without the biggest mea culpa ever, and so they become trapped. That's what happened with a lot of the people in the first administration. They could not go back to mainstream, non-warped, moral society. And then it's compounded, as Heather points out, in this administration, because this administration is just openly outright criminal
Mm-mm.
in a way that even the first administration wasn't.
Right. Even Mike Johnson said that recently. He said, well, the difference with Biden, when he accused him of running a criminal syndicate, was that Biden did things in the shadows, but Trump just does them out in the open. I mean, basically, again, admitting to what you're saying, it seems like it's unabashed criminality now. But to your point about Republicans, Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, it's just in your face. But to the point about Republicans, because this is where I really struggle. Like Heather brought up Iran, and like when looking at Republicans falling in line now, Republicans who have stood the line and said, "Don't do this. We don't want this." They're all falling over their own swords now to comply and bend the knee on something they fundamentally don't believe in. They've done this many, many, many times, and that's different from the criminality aspect of it. That's different of like, yeah, it's eating your soul in little bites, but this is something wholly different. They've all done this, abdicated their own power, and that's where I really struggle. It's not that there's something necessarily in it for them, but it seems to me that they have numbers large enough that if they stood together and actually stood in integrity, that they could push back, but they don't.
Always been true. I mean, that was true. That was true in 2021 when they could have lanced the boil. They could have gotten rid of Trump
True in
permanently from the political.
2015. It's been true all
It's
along.
been true all along, right? They completely. They're I mean, partly it's a collective action problem, and then after a while they become so corrupted that you can't even contemplate that they would get together to fight. And we're so far down that road. There's literally, I don't think there's anything that would cause the Republicans to say that's enough. I mean, I always thought, one of the things that sort of kept me in 2018 and 2019, one of the reasons why I became so vocal is I thought that day was going to come soon, that sooner or later people were going to say, basta, enough with this guy. And, and I wanted to show people that even someone in my position, especially someone in my position where my wife had basically won the fucking election for it and was working in the White House, could do the right thing, so can you. Well, how naive I was.
Well, one of the things that I watch now is it certainly seems to me as if the people in the White House and around Trump are all jockeying to be in position when that Big Mac with his name on it finds its target. And it's interesting because Trump's not mentally okay by any stretch of the imagination. Right. But who can pick up the MAGA voters? And the answer to that is not obvious. I mean, you can see J.D. Vance right now trying to jockey to pick up the evangelicals because he's really the tech bro set. And I spend a lot of time just sort of playing around with how are these different coalitions going to reshape? And I don't see it yet. Do you have any sense of how it's going to play?
I agree with that. This is a personality cult. Okay. I mean, this has been a personality cult. It was a personality. My stated reason in March of 2018 for registering as an independent for the first time in basically since we were in college was that the party had become a personality cult. That was 2018. Okay? Yeah. It's nothing compared to what it is today. Nothing.
That raises the point,
personality. There's no other person.
That raises the point, though. If you had a Republican who was willing to step up, not to be an old-fashioned Republican, not to be sort of the 2014 Republican, but who was really willing to rethink the Republican Party, you'd have a good shot.
I mean, I think there's just a certain percentage of the population that is going to have to take years after he's gone, and the wreckage, and we pick through the wreckage some. I think. I mean, that was the problem in 2024. And 2020 is like you couldn't really run anybody against him because if you ran somebody and he ran somebody as a third party, they'd take more from the Democrat.
Yeah,
and that's the problem.
It occurs to me that one of the
also 2024. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. 2024. I mean, I always thought the problem was that if you ran against Trump as a Republican, the only way to do it would be to go after him hammer and tong. Okay, hammer and tong, and basically say he's a sociopath, he's a sick man, he's mentally deranged, he's a moron, and just be relentless in that. But the problem is, that would piss off the base so that the 20% of the Republicans or 30% of the Republicans, even if you somehow managed to win the nomination, would never vote for you. They'd sit it out. And, that's why I have a friend who started raising money for DeSantis and became a big DeSantis jock. And I told him, it's like big mistake for DeSantis to run. I mean, he's never going to be able to, he's never going to attack Trump the way Trump needs to be attacked. And if he does, he's going to lose. He's going to lose, even if he somehow managed to beat Trump in the primaries, he's going to lose the general because half the party would hate him. So there was no way to solve the Rubik's Cube.
No, that would have been
He's got to go. He's got to be out of the picture. Before there's any chance that we could have a rational, normal, right side, conservative, right wing party, because you have to have. I mean, I think as a matter of sort of modern democracy, you have to have a conservative party that believes in the rule of law in order for democracy to survive. And if once that conservative party goes off the rails, you have big problems, and that's where we are.
Yeah, Heather, what were you saying? Because I don't think we heard what you said.
Just that what you could have gotten away with in 2024 was a sacrificial lamb. Somebody who was just out there in his face all the time with the expectation that he was going to lose or she was going to lose. Probably a he.
Well, I thought that I was hoping that, I mean, she started a little too late and she didn't really follow through, but Haley could have done that.
Yeah. She could have
done that. She could have basically taken a big chunk out of his hide. And for a few weeks there, when basically she had zero chance, she started behaving like that. And I think that if she had gone whole hog at the beginning with that, we'd be better off today. She would have done a lot of damage and it would have been fun. But she didn't. She's absolutely ultimately, at the end of the day, she has no spine.
And now she's persona non grata. I mean,
she somehow managed to basically make everyone hate her.
Exactly. On every side.
Including the fucking people who voted for her in the primary.
Yeah, I mean, she's the weathercock of weathercocks. I mean, Nikki Haley has flip-flopped on Trump more than anybody, more than even Marco Rubio. And DeSantis, I think, tried to run to his right, like tried to go even more extreme on a lot of things. Like
but you also had to go and attack Trump, not try to out-Trump Trump. You have to attack him. Say, this man is old, stupid, and crazy, and dangerous.
Yeah. Sadly,
and everybody get mad at you, but if you keep hammering on that, Trump would have lost it. Okay, Trump can't take that level of pounding. From he would have started to say crazy things.
Well, like he did in response to both Walz and Harris.
Yeah,
and you see it now more than you saw it. I mean, seeing California Governor Gavin Newsom coming in, striking the way he is, and seeing the pushback.
I mean, the problem is it's never been done with the constancy and I'm not brutality because it's truthful stuff, but the energy and the intensity that it needs to be done. I mean, the problem with Trump, the reason why he is normalized is because people don't speak the full truth about him. They don't say. The media won't do it, even though you can factually, I mean, I've been saying this now for 5 years. You can go through the diagnostic criteria for these severe personality disorders of antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, and there is no question he meets all the criteria. And there is no question that anybody who meets some number of these criteria should not be holding any position of power over anybody or anything.
But let's talk about how that narcissism impacts and drives his decision making, because very often, and this is a question right now to ask, very often I think that he's triggered by things that happen on social media or that somebody said somewhere. Like, take Gavin Newsom, for example, take Harvard, for example, take bombing Iran, for example. Like, I don't know how much of that is driven by his need to get retribution, because we know, he seeks constantly revenge against those who've wronged him, against certain legacy media, etc. But let's just take an example like Iran.
Yes.
I think personally that some of the decision making, this all of a sudden, not 2 weeks, 2 days thing, was because, this is my personal take, because he was being offended by being called a chicken, by being mocked for the 2 weeks thing, because that's what he said was 2 weeks. My personal opinion is that had something to do with his decision making to go and do this now.
Look, I mean, everything, again, to go back to why he's been normalized by our political environment and the media is because we don't talk about what makes him tick. We don't
Yeah.
talk about the fact that the public interest, he can't even conceive of it. There is no public interest. There is no interest of the country. He does not care about the country. He does not care about his voters. He does not care about anything other than himself. It's all about his narcissistic whims, his narcissistic desires, his narcissistic thirst. And he sometimes it's possible for him to do the right thing, but it's never possible for him to do the right thing for the wrong reason. And most of the time he's doing the wrong thing and he's doing whatever he does for the wrong reason. And Iran is perfect for that. Okay. Let me go respond to what you were saying there, Joe. He did this not because he wants to destroy the nuclear program. This didn't make any sense as a way to destroy the nuclear program. If you wanted to destroy Iran's nuclear program, you would not have telegraphed for weeks that you were thinking of doing it.
Right.
You would have conducted an airstrike with no warning, maybe in conjunction with the Israelis, maybe not, doesn't matter. It matters for air defense purposes, but you would do that. You wouldn't telegraph it. And what happened was he didn't want to do it. And then he saw Bibi getting all this praise for the powerful Israeli attacks on Iran, and he wanted to be part of it. But he had to talk about it. And so what happened was, they bombed Fordow, the enrichment plant in the mountain, and all the shit's been moved. That's what we're going to find out. There were satellite photos of trucks pouring out of that facility in the past few days, and each centrifuge is basically the size of a huge ski tube, a big ski tube. Okay, so there's no reason to believe anything's still there. And then they didn't actually use the massive ordnance on the place where the U-235 that exists is actually stored. So this was a kabuki dance, all right? This was just him trying to play big shot. And yes, I do think the whole chicken thing, the taco thing, people were taunting him, including never Trumpers. I mean, Adam Kinzinger was taunting him into doing it. Okay, because he's a neocon. And some others who don't like Trump, they taunted him into doing this. And the good news, maybe it turns out, is the kabuki dance on the other side too, because the Iranians didn't really take a big pot shot at the U.S. today. They just went through the motions, probably because they have all their nuclear stuff still, or most of it. So it's all performative, and that's
so let me broaden it, though. One of the things that I think about a lot when we talk about this kind of performative politics, both overseas and at home, is the degree to which the Republican Party really doubled down on what I keep calling cowboy individualism, the idea that the only way to govern, either at home or for the nation or internationally, is to throw your weight around, to be the cowboy who shoots up people and dominates women and people of color. And one of the things that really jumps out to me about Iran is the degree to which Republicans, and of course people like Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton jumps to mind, but there are plenty of them. Ron Johnson was saying this just this morning. The degree to which they keep saying, well, now we're finally going to do something. Well, the truth is that negotiations worked. In 2015, 2 years of negotiations gave us a good deal, but they don't consider negotiations actual governance, that this is a larger problem with their concept of governance, that it must be one strong man imposing his will on other people through violence, as opposed to saying, hey, we can actually govern by doing these cooperative, educated, negotiating community sort of ways of being. And I look at that, and you look at the extraordinary destruction of our post-World War II government, which is built on the idea of negotiation and cooperation and doing the best for the most people, and their determination just to hammer through that with people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Trump himself. And I think, this is not just Trump being Trump or Trump reacting to something. This is really a poison at the heart of what is now Republican politics, but which has really infected a lot of the country altogether. Think I'm overstating it?
No, I don't think so at all. I think you're stating it accurately, and I think part of the reason why it's attractive to the public is it's simple, right?
Easy.
It's You don't have to understand facts.
Guttural.
You don't have to understand consequences. You don't have to understand trade-offs. Okay. And look, and it's lost in all this is, as you say, if you look at the number of centrifuge they were putting into action, it sort drops off when the Iran deal is signed, and then it goes right back up and skyrockets after Trump breaks the deal.
Mm-hmm.
But if there was a need to bomb Iran this year, it was because Trump created that. And
Trump, but Tom Cotton was, he was a junior senator from Arkansas when he wrote that letter to Iran that all those senior senators signed on to, saying, "Don't pay any attention to a deal with Iran, with Obama, because we'll get rid of it as soon as we're in office." I mean, that was 2 years of
yeah, they're
negotiation.
trying to sabotage it. Absolutely. Yeah. No. Absolutely. It's But again, it's partly there's a mentality there, but it's also performative. It makes it simple to oppose when you just say we need to bomb the shit out of the other side,
Mm-hmm.
team of the other country. Easy to understand.
But let's talk about the performative part of this, because all of a sudden there's this shift to regime change when it was no regime change. We don't want regime change. We just want to make sure that they don't have a nuke. That's all we care about. And then now Trump's out there saying, well, maybe regime change wouldn't be such a bad thing. That's a little more nuanced, but is that performative as well? And if so, for whose sake and why?
He just you can't look again. You cannot view Trump as someone who thinks ahead any more than 10 minutes. Okay, this just came out of his brain because it came out of his brain. It came out of his brain. He may have seen something that said that, oh, maybe he realizes we're not going to be able to destroy the nuclear program, or people are going to point out that we didn't. So he's moved to something else to look powerful. And he may, we don't know whether or not he's actually going to pursue that or not. But the truth of the matter is, as some of the analysts I've been reading who have been have pointed out today, is that what we did makes no sense as an effort to destroy the nuclear program, precisely because we let them move the stuff, we gave them warning, and then we didn't bomb the other facilities that had the actual 60% enriched fuel. And so it only makes sense, getting involved in this war only makes sense if you are interested in regime change or putting on a show, or both. And which is, again, you have to go back, and then you go to Netanyahu. There's at least something going on there with, I'm sure they'd like regime change, but is also, he's putting on a show too. He ran out a string in Gaza. That's a lot of what this is about.
So that whole, this whole thing about the performative presidency, though, has been going on for a really long time on the right. And it does, I think, bring up questions of the viability of American democracy if you cut education and people respond to, Trump being essentially a cartoon figure, a TV figure. And that, I think he constantly plays to the performance. But what really honestly keeps me up at night is that I do not believe he will stop until he is stopped.
I agree.
And that I do not understand. I keep coming back to, I do not understand why Republican senators don't react to this. I think they keep hoping it's going to go away. It is not going to go away until it is made to go away. And this actually has me really concerned.
I absolutely agree with that. I don't think he's characters like him, malignant narcissists like him, who achieve significant measures of power, always get worse. They never get they can
Until
never
they
be
are stopped.
until they are stopped, or until they destroy themselves. And I think I've always held the theory that he sooner or later will destroy himself. The problem is, what's the blast radius? And it could include the Constitution, the rule of law in the country, and it's very, very scary. I agree with you. And I think the problem with the Republicans now is they are not only, they're cowards, they've been corrupted, they're physically and morally afraid, and they they now have achieved a level of learned helplessness that is just beyond anything we could have ever imagined. They don't feel like they can do anything, so therefore they do not. And
Let me,
yeah,
well, how far down this road of the destruction of our Constitution and the end of the rule of law in our country would you say that we are right now? Because I know that, a lot of people are looking at this precipitous, what seems like a precipitous fall, and this constant and perpetual attack on the rule of law, on the Constitution. I mean, again, the question of whether or not he could even do what he did in Iran constitutionally. I mean, that's something to talk about, but there's a lot of little bites at the democracy apple that people are like, how can we come back? Heather, what does it look like to push back, to fight back, to stop him? What does that entail other than Republicans, which is like a fever dream at this point? And how far down this path are we right now, especially given what the Supreme Court has basically given him license, or any executive to give him license to do?
Well, the Supreme Court hasn't quite done that, and I think George will probably talk to that. But from the minute he took office, they launched an attack on the Constitution by instituting impoundment, which is the idea that the executive branch doesn't actually have to spend the money that the legislative branch has appropriated for something that our elected representatives think is important for the United States of America. And that, of course, was declared illegal explicitly in 1974 in the Impoundment Control Act. And so they've been attacking the Constitution from the jump. And it seems to me increasingly clear he is planning to stay in office forever. That is, the changes he's making, trying to make to the country, but also changes he's making to the White House, suggests that he expects to spend a lot of time there. That being said, one of the things that I find heartening is the degree to which people are pushing back and rediscovering how important the Constitution is and the rule of law, and that they don't want to lose things like the National Weather Service and Social Security and Medicaid and so on. So how far along are we on this? I think he has moved more quickly than most people do, and I think in many ways that has backfired on him. I do think he is extraordinarily weak. He's a very strong man in many ways, or assuming a lot of control, but he's also enormously weak. He does not have a strong base behind him. He is underwater on every single thing that pollsters look at. And you can see that he recognizes that he's in trouble even with MAGA, with the split over Iran. So I think he is weaker than many people think. I think there is a major backlash to him growing that will end up recreating a new America. But I have said to people for months now, I'm really worried that this summer is going to be really destructive in a lot of ways. And that in addition to worrying about that, what we really need to do, and people like George and me and you need to do, is articulate what it looks like to reclaim the rule of law and to reclaim a country in which democracy actually works. Because one of the things that worries me is if you are younger than, well, if you're your age and younger, Joe, you don't remember a time when American democracy worked. And there's a lot of younger people who are furious about where the country is for really good reasons, like being shot in their kindergartens. And I'm concerned that they too are going to say we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. And one of the things that I try and do is hold space for liberal democracy so that people recognize that it's a work in progress and that it's not partisan, and that you can participate in it and support it and resurrect it without having to destroy it, that you can get your aims through democracy and you don't have to get rid of all those other people and put your own dictator in place. So, I'm not happy with where we are, but I could be a lot more unhappy if he had a strong base of people who still supported him, and he really doesn't.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all of that. I think he's gone faster than one might have expected in a way, and he's done so in a way that's harmful to his cause, and maybe he's going to slow down. But to put a legal overlay on everything that Heather just said, which I agree with, is you have a guy who came in basically refusing to obey the law. in the Constitution, because the Constitution requires him to faithfully execute the law. So he's not obeying the law. He's not obeying the Constitution when he does things like impounds funds, or he tries to shut down government agencies without statutory approval. He's basically ignoring statutes. He's using the excuse of emergencies to do that, to ignore the immigration laws, to invoke the unlawfully invoke the Alien Enemies Act, to nationalize those California National Guard. He's just using a combination of just ignoring statutes, which is therefore violating the Constitution because he's obliged to enforce constitutional laws. And he's also, he's just also making these absurd arguments that because something is an emergency, he deems it as such. It's basically something that nobody else can question. So he's infringing on Article 1, which is Congress. He's also playing games with Article 3, the courts. And that's where the last step is to the destruction of the rule of law. The courts have done the federal courts have done a really, really good job standing up to him, as good as anybody could have hoped for, including the Supreme Court of the United States, which has, may not decided everything the way you want, but it stood in the Alien Enemies Act cases. I mean, they really, really are drawing a line, and they're showing a belief. They're expressing a view, at least in that last. One of those last decisions, they're basically showing with the case that came out of Texas, they're showing a very strong skepticism about the good faith of the administration, which is something that courts normally do not do. So, and that's the Supreme Court, and all the courts are doing that. And so that gives me a lot of hope. But the problem is, courts have no armies; they have no police. I mean, the Supreme Court's got a police force, but it's only charged with keeping the plaza clear. They have no way of enforcing their orders except through the executive branch, through the Department of Justice, the U.S. Marshal Service in particular, and the Bureau of Prisons. You want to throw somebody in contempt for a federal officer in contempt for disobeying a court order? You got to get a U.S. Marshal who works indirectly for Donald Trump through Pam Bondi to arrest that official and put that person in a jail that is run by the U.S. Bureau of Prisons, which is also part of the Department of Justice. So that's a big problem. And what happens, right now they are disobeying court orders, but doing so in kind of a dog ate my homework kind of way, and kind of a slipshod way. They're obeying some orders because, they brought Abrego Garcia back into the country. They let free the Columbia student the other day. They're obeying some orders where they really have to, but in other ways they're dragging their feet and lying to the court, and they're lying to the court. They're gaslighting courts, and that's a form of disobedience of court orders too. Just not, and they're threatening to say that there are certain things that we will not obey. They're hinting at that because courts can't tell us what to do in the area of national security, which they think could be anything. And that's where the danger lies. Once they decide, and I think they ultimately will, just to disobey outright a court order, including that of the Supreme Court of the United States, that's when the rule of law will be gone, because then we'll basically have one branch government. And the only thing that'll stand the way to fight that is people out in the streets. Just period.
Is that the answer? When everybody always asks me this, what happens when they defy a court order? And the answer is we get out in the streets.
That's it. That's the only answer. It is the only answer. And you think about it, it's what Ben Franklin said, right? At the last day of the Constitutional Convention, some prominent socialite in Philadelphia asked him, well, what do we got? We have a constitution if you can keep it, right? And that's absolutely the case. I mean, Lanton and Scalia used to talk about what wonderful constitutions other countries had, like the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, which had an amazing list of the bills of rights, much, much more expansive than our Bill of Rights. It didn't mean a damn thing. Doesn't mean a damn thing unless people follow it and take it seriously and respect it. And if Trump won't do that, and the courts can't make him do that, it's up to us.
Did you two 19-year-old, 18-year-old kids 45 years ago ever imagine you would be having conversations like this right now? Could you ever even conceive of being in this extraordinary place and not extraordinary for any of the right reasons?
No,
No,
no.
no.
There are about 50 alternative universes where we are not on this podcast, and we are doing things that are of no interest to anybody.
And maybe that's the answer. You just keep putting one foot in front of the other and trying to do the next right thing. And sometimes what you do is important, and sometimes what you do isn't. And all you can do is try and do your best.
Well, on that note, you both do your best, and I try very hard to do my best in keeping with what you're doing. And what you're doing is making a difference, and it is inspiring people, and it is giving people hope, and it is making them feel sane, even if sane adjacent, sane infused, sane-ish. Both of you are doing that right now. So I am greatly appreciative, and I know so many people who are huge fans, and I appreciate you both just every day taking another step for the right reasons in the right direction. And as a mom of two kids who are 12 and 15, who George knows because we are all Yankees fans and Rangers fans, and we've been to games together, that they're my why, and you are both working towards protecting and preserving this little experiment of ours. And for me, that's very personal. It's not just
It's
for them,
for them.
but that they're
It's
my
for
why.
them. It is for them.
Yeah.
For all our children.
Well, thank you. Thank you both so very much. This was a dream of mine for so long. George remembers we sat down for Lebanese food in DC the day after I met Heather at the White House, and he said he'd talk to you, and I said, you two have to be on a podcast together. The world needs that. The universe needs that. And he's like, okay, sure.
Well,
Thank
it's been
you.
a real pleasure. Thank you.
A huge thank you to both George Conway and Heather Cox Richardson for joining me today and for bringing their clarity and expertise and humor and nostalgia, by the way, to a moment that desperately needs it. If you found this episode helpful, please rate and review Sanish, share it with your friends, and join our community on Substack and YouTube. Stay strong, stay sane-ish, and remember, democracy doesn't defend itself, and neither does sanity. Keep asking questions, keep showing up, and keep demanding better.